The subway train rattled through the city, the dull hum of conversation mixing with the occasional screech of metal against tracks. It was just another ordinary afternoon. People rushing home from work, tired faces glued to their phones, lost in their own worlds. But for 17-year-old Marcus, this ride was about to change everything. Marcus sat near the middle of the train, his headphones in, but the music turned low. He had just finished basketball practice, his gym bag resting between his feet. He wasn't the kind of kid who sought attention, just a regular teenager trying to make it through the day. But then something caught his eye. A few feet away, a woman stepped onto the train. She looked exhausted, her hand resting on her lower back as if carrying the weight of the world. Or, more accurately, the weight of the child growing inside her. She was pregnant, and no one else seemed to notice. The packed train gave her no room to sit, and the way she gripped the rail made it clear she was struggling to keep her balance. Marcus glanced around. Plenty of grown men, plenty of able-bodied people, but no one budged. Some were too distracted. Others avoided eye contact. He sighed, already knowing what he had to do. Without a second thought, he stood up, gesturing to the woman. "Ma'am, you can take my seat." She looked at him, surprised, as if kindness like this was rare. "Oh, thank you. That's really sweet of you." She lowered herself carefully into the seat, letting out a breath of relief. Marcus simply nodded, gripping the overhead rail to steady himself as the train jerked forward. He didn't think much of it. His mama had always taught him to respect others, especially those in need. But as the train rolled on, the woman reached into her purse, pulling out a small folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it to him. "Here," she said softly. "I want you to have this." Marcus hesitated. It wasn't money. It wasn't a thank you card. It was just a note. His fingers brushed against the worn paper as he took it from her, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Curiosity gnawed at him. What could she possibly have written? A simple thank you? A kind message? Or was it something more? As the train continued on its path, Marcus unfolded the note, and what he read made his heart stop. This wasn't just a thank you. It was something that would change his life forever. Marcus stared at the note in his hands, his fingers tightening around the thin piece of paper as his heart pounded in his chest. The train continued to move, rocking gently from side to side, but everything around him suddenly felt distant, muted. The sounds of conversations, the occasional beeping of someone's phone, even the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks, it all faded into the background. His eyes moved across the words, reading them once, then again, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The handwriting was neat but rushed, the ink slightly smudged in places, as if the woman had written it quickly, her hands unsteady. "You don't know me, but I know who you are. Please don't ignore this. Your life is about to change. Trust me." Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He lifted his gaze, his eyes darting toward the woman. She was sitting there calmly, hands resting on her stomach, staring straight ahead like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just dropped a bomb into his lap. A strange chill ran through him. What did she mean she knew who he was? That didn't make sense. He had never seen this woman before in his life. She was a stranger, just another passenger on the train. So, why would she say something like that? His mind raced, trying to connect dots that didn't exist. Was this some kind of joke? A prank? He glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching him, waiting for his reaction. But no one paid him any attention. The train was filled with the usual crowd, tired workers, students, people lost in their own worlds. Nothing felt out of place, except for this. He looked down at the note again, rereading the words, his stomach twisting in knots. This wasn't just a simple thank you. It wasn't a random message of kindness. It was something else. Something bigger. Marcus clenched his jaw, debating what to do. Should he ask her about it? Demand an explanation? But as soon as the thought crossed his mind, the train jolted to a stop, the doors sliding open with a hiss. The woman shifted in her seat, then, without a word, she stood up. His breath caught. She was leaving. Wait, The word barely escaped his lips before she stepped toward the doors, her movements careful but deliberate. Marcus hesitated for only a second before pushing forward, weaving through the crowded train. He wasn't going to let her just walk away, not without answers. He reached the door just as she stepped onto the platform, his pulse racing. "Hey," he called out, stepping off after her. The train's departure signal dinged behind him, but he ignored it. The woman turned slightly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. But there was something in her expression, something unreadable, almost sad. And then, just as quickly as she had entered his life, she disappeared into the crowd. Marcus stood frozen, the note still clutched in his hand, the train pulling away behind him. He had no idea what had just happened, but something told him this was only the beginning. That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the note resting on his nightstand. He had read it at least a dozen times, hoping that maybe, somehow, the words would change, that they would suddenly make sense. But they didn't. Frustration bubbled inside him. He didn't like mysteries, and he definitely didn't like feeling like someone had information about him that he didn't even have himself. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping him out of his thoughts. He reached for it, squinting at the screen. A text from his best friend, Jason. "Yo, you good? Coach was mad you dipped early today." Marcus sighed. "Right. Basketball practice." He had left as soon as it ended, barely saying a word to anyone. He wasn't even sure if he had said goodbye to Jason. "Yeah, I'm good. Just tired." The 3 dots appeared, showing that Jason was typing. "Bet. You coming tomorrow though, right? We need you." Marcus hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Normally, he would have just typed yeah and moved on, but tonight felt different. He wasn't sure why, but his mind wasn't in the game anymore. Not after what happened on the train. "Yeah, I'll be there." He set his phone down, exhaling slowly. Maybe he was overthinking this. Maybe the woman was just some random person messing with him, and he was letting it get to his head. But as he turned over and tried to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not even close. The next day, Marcus couldn't focus on anything. Not school, not practice, not even lunch with Jason and the rest of the team. The note was still in his pocket, burning a hole in his thoughts, distracting him every time he tried to push it aside. By the time the final bell rang, he had made up his mind. He needed answers. There was only one problem. He had no idea where to start. The woman hadn't given him a name, a number, nothing. She had just handed him the note and vanished. How was he supposed to find someone who didn't want to be found? He pulled out the note again, reading it one more time. His fingers traced the ink, searching for something, anything, that might help. And then, just as he was about to fold it back up, he noticed something. A faint smudge at the bottom. It wasn't just any smudge. It looked like a phone number. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was faded, barely visible, as if it had been erased or written lightly. But it was there. His pulse quickened. Was this a mistake? Had she meant for him to see it? Or was this some kind of test? There was only one way to find out. With a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and typed in the numbers, his fingers trembling slightly as he hovered over the call button. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. And then, before he could talk himself out of it, he pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. Then, a click. Silence. Then a voice, soft but firm. "I was hoping you'd call." Marcus felt his breath hitch at the sound of the voice. It was calm, almost too calm, like the person on the other end had been expecting his call for a long time. His fingers tightened around the phone as he swallowed hard. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. A pause. A slight exhale. Then, "I can't tell you that. Not yet." Marcus's jaw clenched. He had been patient long enough. First, the mysterious note. Then, the woman vanishing before he could get any answers. Now, a cryptic phone call from someone who refused to give their name? It was too much. "You can't just drop something like this on me and expect me to play along," he said, his frustration bubbling up. "I don't even know what this is about." "You will," the voice replied smoothly. "But not over the phone." Marcus frowned. His grip on the phone tightened as he walked out of school, his mind racing. This was getting weirder by the second. He should hang up. He should ignore this whole thing. But he couldn't. He was already in too deep. Then tell me where to meet you, he said. A beat of silence. Then, tomorrow. 6 p.m. The old bookstore on Maple. Marcus knew the place. It was one of those forgotten spots, a small, dusty shop that barely got any business. It was the kind of place no one would think twice about. A perfect place for a secret meeting. Before he could ask any more questions, the line clicked. The call was over. Marcus stared at his screen, his heart pounding. What had he just walked into? That night, Marcus barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed everything over and over. The woman on the train, the note, the phone call. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening, something way bigger than him. But why him? What did he have to do with any of this? The next day at school, he was completely out of it. He barely paid attention in class, barely touched his lunch. Even Jason noticed. "Dude, what's up with you?" Jason asked, nudging him in the cafeteria. "You've been acting weird since yesterday." Marcus hesitated. He had always told Jason everything. They had been best friends since middle school. But this was different. He couldn't just say, "Hey, some random pregnant woman gave me a note saying she knows who I am, and now I'm meeting a stranger in an abandoned bookstore." Jason would think he was losing it. "I'm just tired," Marcus muttered, pushing his food around his tray. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Nah, man. I know you. This ain't just tired." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "It's nothing, all right? Just got a lot on my mind." Jason studied him for a moment before shrugging. "All right. But if you need to talk, you know I got you." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I know." But this wasn't something Jason could help with. This was something Marcus had to figure out on his own. The bookstore was even quieter than Marcus remembered. The windows were dusty, and the wooden sign creaked slightly in the wind. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. His stomach twisted as he stepped inside. The air smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet, like cinnamon. Dim lighting cast long shadows across the shelves, making the place feel even more deserted. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, "You came." Marcus turned sharply. A man stood near the back of the store, dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans. He looked to be in his mid-30s, his face partially hidden by the shadow of his hood. There was something familiar about him, though Marcus couldn't place it. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice firm. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to a small table near the corner. "Sit." Marcus didn't move. "Not until you tell me what's going on." The man sighed, as if he had expected the resistance. "You want answers? Fine. But not here." He glanced around the store, his expression tense. "It's not safe." Marcus frowned. "Not safe from what?" The man exhaled sharply. "Look, kid. There are things you don't know, things you shouldn't know. But now that you're involved, there's no turning back." A cold chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Involved in what?" The man's eyes darkened. "Something bigger than both of us." Marcus clenched his fists. He was tired of the vague answers, the secrecy, the feeling like he was being pulled into something without knowing why. "Then start talking," he said. "Because I'm not going anywhere until you do." The man studied him for a long moment, then finally, he nodded. "All right, Marcus," he said quietly. "Let's start from the beginning." And just like that, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But the truth was far more dangerous than Marcus could have ever imagined. Marcus sat across from the man, his heart pounding in his chest. The bookstore felt even smaller now, the walls closing in, the air thick with unspoken words. He could feel the weight of whatever truth was about to come, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You need to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you, it's not something you can just walk away from." Marcus swallowed hard, but didn't look away. "Then tell me." The man exhaled, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to find the right words. "The woman on the train, Her name is Emily Carter. She's not just some random stranger. She's been looking for you." Marcus's stomach twisted. "Looking for me? Why?" The man hesitated, his fingers tapping against the wooden table. "Because she knows something about your past. Something that was never supposed to come out." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. His past? He had lived a normal life. Regular kid, regular family, nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what he had always believed. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "What does she know?" The man's jaw tightened. "Your real parents." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He felt the room spin for a second, his vision blurring at the edges. "My what?" The man's expression was grim. "You were adopted, Marcus." Marcus's head snapped up. "That's not true." His voice was sharp, but inside, doubt clawed at him. His mom and dad had never once mentioned adoption. They had raised him, loved him. There had never been any reason to question it. The man watched him carefully. "I know it's hard to hear, but it's the truth. Emily, she has proof." Marcus's hands curled into fists. He felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. "Why would she keep this from me? Why now?" The man shook his head. "That's what she was trying to tell you. That note, it was her way of warning you before it was too late." Marcus's pulse raced. "Too late for what?" The man hesitated again, his eyes flickering toward the door, like he was afraid someone was listening. Then he leaned in even closer. "Because someone doesn't want you to know." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Who?" The man exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. Emily's in danger. And if you don't find her first, you will be too." Marcus's mind spun with questions. None of this made sense. How could he be in danger just from knowing the truth? And why had Emily gone through all this trouble to warn him? He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need to find her." The man nodded, but his expression remained tense. "She was last seen at a shelter on 8th Street. But if you go after her, you need to be careful. You're not the only one looking for her." Marcus's throat tightened. "Who else?" The man hesitated, then finally said, "People who don't want the truth to come out." Marcus's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay steady. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore this. Emily had risked everything to reach him. Now, it was his turn to find her before it was too late. Marcus barely felt his feet hitting the pavement as he rushed toward 8th Street. His mind was racing faster than his legs, every thought tangled with the weight of what he had just learned. He had parents he never knew about. Someone had kept that truth from him. And now, the only person who could give him answers was in danger. The city lights blurred past him as he weaved through the crowded sidewalks, his breath coming in short, quick bursts. He didn't even know what he would say when he found Emily, if he found her. But he couldn't stop now. He had to know the truth. When he reached the shelter, the building looked as rundown as he had expected. Faded paint peeled off the walls, and a flickering street lamp buzzed overhead. A few people lingered near the entrance, bundled up in layers, lost in their own struggles. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The air smelled of old coffee and something stale. A woman at the front desk looked up as he approached, her eyes tired but kind. "Can I help you?" Marcus swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "I'm looking for someone." "A woman named Emily Carter. She's pregnant. Have you seen her?" The woman's expression shifted ever so slightly. Marcus caught it. "She was here," she admitted, glancing around like she wasn't sure if she should be talking to him. "Couple of nights ago. Didn't stay long." Marcus's stomach clenched. "Do you know where she went?" The woman hesitated, lowering her voice. "Look, kid. If you're looking for her, you're not the only one." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "What do you mean?" The woman sighed, leaning in slightly. "Some men came in yesterday, asking the same thing. They weren't exactly the friendly type." Marcus felt his pulse spike. What did they look like? Dark suits. Clean cut. But there was something about them. Something off. Like they weren't here to help. She paused, then gave him a cautious look. Why are you looking for her? Marcus hesitated, his mind spinning. He didn't know how much to say, but he couldn't afford to waste time. She left me a message. Said she had something important to tell me. The woman studied him, then nodded slightly, as if making up her mind. If she was trying to find you, she was scared. I could see it in her eyes. She looked around again before leaning in even closer. But I think I know where she went. Marcus held his breath. Where? The woman glanced at the back door, then lowered her voice even more. There's an old motel on the west side. She mentioned it when she left, said she needed somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. Marcus's stomach twisted. A motel? That didn't sound safe at all. Which one? The Evergreen Inn, the woman said. But if those men were looking for her too, you better hurry. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He muttered a quick thank you before rushing out the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Emily was running. And she wasn't just running from the truth. She was running for her life. The motel wasn't far, but every second felt like an eternity. His hands clenched into fists as he tried to make sense of everything. Who were these men looking for her? And why were they so desperate to keep her from talking to him? By the time he reached the Evergreen Inn, the sky had darkened, the neon sign flickering weakly. The place was just as bad as he had feared: stained walls, a cracked parking lot, and a single flickering light above the office door. Marcus walked inside, trying to keep his breathing steady. A bored-looking clerk sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. I'm looking for someone, Marcus said, pushing the urgency into his voice. Emily Carter. She checked in recently. She's room 214, the clerk said without looking up. But you just missed her. Marcus's heart dropped. What? The clerk finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. 2 guys in suits came in about 10 minutes ago. Looked real serious. She left with them. Marcus felt the ground tilt beneath him. No. He turned and bolted out of the office, his eyes darting across the parking lot. There was no sign of Emily. No sign of anyone. He was too late. But then, a car engine roared to life. Marcus's had snapped toward the sound just in time to see a black SUV pulling out of the parking lot, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Instinct kicked in before fear could stop him. Marcus sprinted toward the SUV, his feet pounding against the pavement. Emily, he shouted. For a split second, he thought he saw movement behind the dark glass, just a glimpse of a figure in the back seat. Then the car sped up. Marcus pushed himself harder, but it was no use. The SUV disappeared down the road, its taillights fading into the night. He skidded to a stop, his breath coming in ragged gasps, frustration burning in his chest. Emily was gone. And now, whoever had taken her had the answers he needed. Marcus clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wasn't giving up. If they thought they could take Emily and make this all disappear, they were wrong. Because whatever they were hiding, whatever secret they didn't want him to know, he was going to find out. No matter what it took. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the parking lot, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts as the SUV disappeared into the distance. His heart pounded, so hard it felt like it might break through his ribs. Emily was gone. He had been so close. Too close. His fingers clenched into fists. He wasn't going to lose her. Not now. He pulled out his phone and, without thinking, dialed the only number he could. The call rang once before the man from the bookstore picked up. They took her, Marcus said, his voice tight. A pause. Then, where? The Evergreen Inn. Black SUV. 2 guys in suits. The man let out a sharp breath. I was afraid of this. Marcus felt a surge of frustration. What do they want with her? She's the only one who knows the full truth. And now that she's tried to tell you, they can't afford to let her go. A shiver ran down Marcus's spine. Where would they take her? The man was silent for a moment, then said, There's a warehouse on the east side of town, near the old shipping docks. If they're trying to keep her quiet, that's where they'll do it. Marcus didn't need to hear anything else. He turned and ran toward the nearest street, waving down a cab without even thinking. He gave the driver the address, his leg bouncing impatiently as they sped through the city. He had no plan, no backup, no idea what he was about to walk into. But he wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. When the cab finally pulled up near the docks, Marcus barely waited for the car to stop before jumping out. The area was dark, the streetlights barely flickering. The warehouse loomed ahead, its metal exterior rusted and worn. Marcus crept forward, staying low, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear muffled voices inside. Slowly, he edged toward a window, peering in. Emily was there. She sat on a chair in the middle of the room, her hands tied in front of her. Her face was pale, but she was awake, her eyes darting around, searching for a way out. Two men stood nearby, speaking in hushed voices. One of them was pacing, frustrated. The other was on the phone, his back turned. Marcus knew he had to act fast. He scanned the area, looking for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a stack of wooden crates near the entrance. If he could get inside without them noticing, maybe he could untie Emily before they realized. A sudden movement inside made him freeze. One of the men pulled out a gun. Marcus's stomach dropped. "We need to end this now," the man said. "Before it's too late." Marcus's pulse roared in his ears. He didn't have time to think. He had to do something. He spotted a metal pipe lying nearby. Without hesitating, he grabbed it and edged toward the side door, pushing it open just enough to slip inside. The moment he stepped in, the air felt heavier. The men hadn't noticed him yet. He crept forward, his breath shallow. Emily's eyes flickered toward him, widening slightly, but she didn't make a sound. Marcus moved quickly, crouching behind the crates, inching closer. He could hear their conversation more clearly now. "She knows too much," the man with the gun said. "We should wait for orders," the other man replied. "There's no time." Marcus tightened his grip on the pipe. He had to stop them now. Then Emily made her move. In one sharp motion, she kicked the chair backward, slamming into the man holding the gun. He stumbled, caught off guard, and before he could recover, Marcus sprang forward. The pipe connected with the man's arm, sending the gun clattering to the floor. "Run!" Marcus shouted. Emily scrambled to her feet, still tied, but moving fast. The second man lunged toward her, but Marcus swung again, forcing him back. "Get the gun!" Emily yelled. Marcus dove for it just as the first man recovered, lunging toward him. They crashed to the floor, struggling for control. The man was stronger, pinning Marcus down, his hands clawing for the weapon. Marcus gritted his teeth, using every bit of strength he had. Then Emily, still bound, kicked the man hard in the ribs. He yelped, rolling off Marcus just long enough for him to grab the gun. "Stay down," Marcus shouted, his hands shaking as he pointed it at them. The men froze. Emily rushed to Marcus's side, breathing hard. He quickly reached down and untied her hands, his fingers trembling. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, rubbing her wrists. "We have to get out of here." Marcus kept the gun raised as they backed toward the door. The men didn't move, their eyes locked on the weapon. As soon as they stepped outside, Marcus dropped the gun, his whole body shaking. Emily grabbed his arm. "Come on." They ran. Neither of them stopped until they were blocks away, lungs burning, legs aching. Finally, they collapsed onto a bench near an empty street. Marcus turned to her. "What do they want from you?" Emily swallowed hard. "It's not just about me, Marcus." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's about you." Marcus's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Emily hesitated, then finally said, "Your real parents, they didn't just give you up." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "They were taken." Marcus's world tilted. "What?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "They were never supposed to be found. And now that you're looking for the truth, they're coming for you too." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Marcus felt the weight of Emily's words settle deep in his chest. His real parents had been taken. Not given up. Not lost. But stolen from him, hidden away in a truth so dark that powerful people were willing to do anything to keep it buried. The night air felt heavier now, pressing in around him as he sat on the bench, trying to process everything. Emily was watching him closely, her expression cautious, like she was afraid he might break. He almost laughed at the thought. After everything that had happened, maybe he already had. "How do you know this?" His voice was quiet, barely more than a breath. Emily hesitated, then pulled something from her pocket. It was a crumpled envelope. She handed it to him. "I found this," she said. "Your mother wrote it." Marcus stared at it, his hands suddenly unsteady as he unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was rushed but careful, the ink slightly smudged, like it had been written in a hurry. He swallowed hard and began to read. "Marcus, if you ever find this, it means the truth has started to surface. We never abandoned you. We fought for you. But there were forces bigger than us, people with power, who didn't want you to know who you really are. We tried to run, but they caught us. They told us you would be safe if we disappeared. We had no choice. We gave you up so you could live." Marcus's vision blurred. His fingers tightened around the letter. "They will try to keep this hidden forever. But you deserve to know the truth. You were never alone. We love you always." His breath hitched. For years, he had convinced himself he didn't care about the past, that it didn't matter where he came from. But now, here it was, everything he had never let himself hope for. His parents had loved him. They had never wanted to leave. And someone had taken them away. He looked at Emily, his voice raw. "Where are they?" She shook her head. "I don't know. The people who took them, they hide everything too well. But there has to be a way to find them." Marcus exhaled slowly. He had spent his whole life accepting what he had been told, that he had been unwanted, abandoned, that there was no reason to look back. But now he knew better. And if his parents were still out there somewhere, he wasn't going to stop until he found them. He looked down at the letter again, his mind spinning. There had to be more clues. Some kind of lead. He thought about the men who had taken Emily, about how desperate they had been to keep her from talking. That meant she had gotten close, closer than anyone else. "Well, do you know?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "I know they've been moving people. Your parents weren't the only ones. It's part of something bigger, something they've been doing for years. I don't have all the answers, but..." She looked at him, determination burning in her eyes. "I know how to find them." Marcus felt something stir in him, something stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. He had spent so much of his life drifting, feeling like he had no real direction. But now, for the first time, he knew exactly what he had to do. He reached over and took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "Then let's go find them." She nodded, a small but determined smile on her lips. Together. The next few days were a blur. Emily led him to an old contact, someone who had been keeping records on disappearances like his parents. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every piece of information they uncovered only confirmed what Emily had told him. There were people pulling the strings behind the scenes, people who thought they could decide who got to stay and who had to disappear. But Marcus wasn't afraid anymore. One night, as they sat in a dingy motel room, maps and notes spread out in front of them, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "What happens after?" she asked. Marcus frowned. "After what?" "After we find them. After you get the answers you're looking for." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He had been so focused on the search that he hadn't thought beyond it. But now, sitting there, he realized something. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think I just want to know them. To see them. To understand everything they went through." Emily nodded. "And if they don't want to be found?" Marcus swallowed hard. The thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. But he had come too far to turn back now. "Then at least I'll know I tried," he said. Emily reached over and placed her hand on his. "Then we keep going." Marcus looked at her, at the girl who had risked everything to help him, at the person who had become his family even before he had realized it. He didn't know where this road would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. And no matter what they found, he was ready.